And let's welcome on Dr. Marianne Matzo, who's author of Everyone Dies, and Yes, It's Normal. And Dr. Matzo, thank you. And good morning. I understand you're in Oklahoma.
Right. We're an hour earlier here. And thank you so much, Steve,
Okay,
for
so
having me on.
Yeah, this is great. And thank you for being here. I debated on whether to reschedule everything, but I was so excited to have you, and I figure we've got people signed up. We're going to have a great discussion, and we'll do it again with Amanda and again.
Yeah.
So before we dive into this, I'm really curious about this book that you've written. But before we dive into that, give us a little bit about your background and what led you to writing this book, and what are some of the other interesting projects that you're involved with?
Well, that's going to take the whole hour, Steve. So, so I'm a registered nurse. I graduated in 1978, and was really interested in geropsych, which didn't exist. And so I became a gerontological nurse. And so that, that's it's generalist, which I think probably was a good pathway. And eventually received my PhD in gerontology from the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And so as a nurse practitioner and with that PhD, I was teaching, but I also was real interested throughout my doctoral program of the idea of things that are of fate worse than death. And I always really hated, in curriculum when they put dying with the gerontology content. Those two things always went together. And it would annoy me because there's more, young people die and old people have a lot more to do than to just die. And so why is that always stuck together in curriculum, right? So as I was doing my dissertation, I did my dissertation on assisted death and found that the nurses who were more active in helping a patient die at the patient's request were the younger nurses. And I thought, well, what's going on in nursing education that nurses don't know what other options they have other than to give in to what it is, to act on what the patient's requesting. And so I'm interested in nursing education relative to palliative care. So that was probably 96, 97, in there somewhere. And so I was a Soros Scholar for the Project on Death in America and have worked in palliative care ever since then.
Wow. Well, I love what you're saying about the correlation between death and dying and aging and gerontology, and how they're sometimes viewed as synonymous, and how one of the things that we talk a lot about on these discussions is the stigma of aging and the language of aging. And that is just one of these things where nobody was intentionally doing that, it's just one of these things, but the harm that does to the stigma of our elders is very negative, so I never looked at it that way, but I can tell you, in looking at a lot of the aging studies curriculum and things like that out there, that they do link the death and dying classes in the gerontology program, which really I get why, but we need to stop that. So as your profession, what was your career path since then? What are you, a practicing physician or?
So I'm a nurse practitioner.
Okay.
And I, in the early 90s, I guess, late 80s, I was involved in developing curriculum for gerontology for nurses in terms of how do you teach, undergraduate students about gerontology? Because for many of them, that's a bridge too far. That's like, oh, that's way down the line. That has nothing to do with me. And so how do you make it so that, yes, this does have to do with you? So I did that for about 5 years. And then, like I said, I was funded by the Soros Foundation for the Project on Death in America and focused on education of nurses relative to end of life issues. And
Okay.
so the thing with the Soros Foundation is that one of the commitments that they ask you to make is to dedicate your career to changing the culture of death and dying in this country. So you have to kind of agree that that's what you're going to do with your career, which is what I did. And go ahead.
Oh, no, now the children's book is starting to make a lot more sense, and what a great way to make some impact.
Well, so I worked in palliative care. I've written, we wrote the very first nursing palliative care textbook that was published first in 2000. It's in its 5th edition now. I've traveled all over the world teaching palliative care nursing. We started a palliative care nursing program, a master's program in Japan. I did a lot of work with AIDS hospitals in the Russian Federation, traveled back and forth there a lot, and had an endowed chair in palliative care nursing at the University of Oklahoma, so I was a tenured professor there. And I got to a point in my career as I got older where I've always wanted to be a nurse ever since I was a little kid. And I liked teaching and I liked the education, but I really wanted to take care of people more. So I was at the VA as on their palliative care consult team, and eventually at our cancer center at the University of Oklahoma, Stevenson Cancer Center, and started the palliative care clinic at the cancer center. So we saw every kind of cancer diagnosis, but managed the pain and symptom management. So palliative care is pain and symptom management for people with life-threatening or life-limiting illness. It's not hospice. It starts at the time of diagnosis. But in my career, I've also worked as a hospice nurse. I've done a lot of patient education. And as I got older and closer to retirement, I thought, when I retire, I want to do more with public education, because our public really doesn't know about their diseases, about their choices. What happens when you go to the hospital? What happens if you're resuscitated? We say to people, oh, do you want to be resuscitated? Well, duh, of course I do. But nobody really talks to them about, so what is resuscitation? What happens when you're resuscitated? That whole thing. And when you explain it to people, they're like, I don't want that. Just let it go. And so, but we don't take the time to really talk with people about it. And then in my role at the VA hospital, whenever we had vets with young kids who were dying, the team would say, oh, Marianne, you talk with the kids. I'm a gerontologist, just like they were. It's like, oh, about kids, but I had kids. So I would work with the children. And I thought, we need to do a better job about this too. And so once I retired, what we did is we started a podcast called Everyone Dies. And that's public education about life-limiting illness, dying, death, and bereavement. And for many older people, it's like podcast. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. I just say it's a radio show, just like, my mother always listened to radio shows. It's just a radio show. It's just, listen to it a little different way. And we just give people the information that they need. We've been doing it since April of 2020 is when we started. We put out one podcast a week. So we have quite a few podcasts on a lot of different topics. Artificial food and fluids, advanced directives, these kinds of things. And the beauty of that is that, you could listen to it, Steve. And then if you've got kids in other places or whatever, you can
I
have,
shared the podcast
oh,
on
I
the
see that.
screen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You,
yeah. You got some
you
great
can,
great topics here. What you need to know before go shopping at a legal dispensary. I know medical marijuana in older adults is a very there's a lot of I love this one. What happens to debt and credit after death? This is really good.
well, they're the
Um,
questions that, patients would ask me when they would come into my clinic to see me. Or I ended my career at the cancer center and also at the VA hospital, worked full time at the VA hospital in the oncology department. So I was an oncology nurse practitioner. So this is what I was doing, was explaining lab results, just explaining it all to people. And so many times people would say, you're the first one to answer these questions for me. Well, I don't know that if that's necessarily true, because I know that, it's like when you teach, like, nobody ever taught us that before.
right. People
Baloney. You
tune
just don't remember it.
and on the topic of death, dying, and elder care and aging, they tune it out until the last possible minute. And that's why we need to be creative and we need repetition.
Right.
So,
Right.
um,
And that's one of the beauties of the podcast, is that you can listen to the thing as many times as you want.
while
We
you're
have
walking the dog, what
Yeah.
have you. Yep.
And there's three parts. The first part is kind of easing people into things. The middle part is the meat of the program. And the end part is easing you out. And so some people say, oh, you chat and laugh too much. It's like that only in the beginning and maybe only in the end. But in the middle, where the serious content is, we're serious. And
Yeah.
so, the fast forward button exists for a reason. Feel free to use it if you don't want to, listen to the poem or whatever it is that we're doing. But the content's there, and you can share it with anybody in the world so that everybody can have the same information, which is really lacking. Like you can go to the doctor's office and the doctor could say, well, you have IPF, and here's what that is. Well, if you've got 6 other relatives who are saying, well, what the doctor say? Well, they said I got this lung thing, and I don't know. They have to do a lung transplant, and people are like, wait, what? So this gives that information. Everybody can hear the same thing.
That's great. Now, how did this, so was it the podcast that led to writing a children's book?
No, I have wanted to write a children's book for a very long time. My sister had a Montessori school, and I always thought I kind of think of things before they become popular, and I don't ever make them happen. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a Montessori school and like an elder daycare together? And because I go and hang out at a Montessori school. And so thankfully, I've seen where they put those two populations together, and it's so mutually beneficial. But I thought, we approach death with such fear and such misinformation, and even the language was serious and illnesses. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to beat this. Well, you can fight it. You can even beat it, but you're still going to die. Something is still going to happen, that you're going to die, because we're created as mortal. And we don't, in this in industrial age or the technology age, we can pretend it isn't going to happen. My kid's dad is 72 years old. His father just died. His mother died last year. Never in history could you get to 72 and have both parents, 71 and have both parents still alive. This is a whole different thing. So it's easy for us to pretend that death isn't anything that has to do with us. It's optional. I can ignore it because it has nothing to do with me. Until something happens and you're in an ICU, you don't have your advance directive done, because although you thought it was important, you just hadn't gotten around to doing it yet, right? And so we put off and we put off and we put off, and we think, oh man, I gotta do a will. geez, I really should talk to somebody about if I want artificial food and fluids, and you know, and even an understanding of what does that mean? Does it mean that they're going to starve me to death and I'm going to be really hungry and really thirsty, and what are the facts? And so we don't educate ourselves about it. And then in a crisis, we have a whole lot to learn. And a crisis situation is a really bad time to be making decisions and trying to learn something new.
Mhm. Well, and sort of talking about, as you talk about death, dying, healthcare problems, there are more than likely in our families, there are children that are observing our behavior and how we are reacting. And then, like, I know that when our dog passed away and my children were very young, that was the first time that I had to talk about death with my kids, and that was very difficult. So yeah, with your
What
book.
did Steve tell me what you told them? Do you
Well,
remember?
you know what we did? We went on Amazon and we found some books because I just didn't have the capacity. And even though I'm in this field of aging studies, it's the first time that I ever had to have a conversation like that with somebody who's younger. And so I forgot the books that we got, but we basically, the kids were at that age where we read a book to them every night. And it was sort of like, I know you're feeling kind of sad about, the dog's name was Brown. So I got this book, let's read it, and it seemed to raise the awareness. I because they were so young, and those years go by. I don't remember their reaction. I don't remember, what happened.
I was just curious what you told them.
Oh, no. Well, what I'm kind of, because you've written this children's book on this interesting topic, I'm really curious about what you've learned in the conversations that you've had with your readers, with the people that have purchased the book, and maybe some tips and thoughts, on having conversations related to death and dying with children.
Right. So the thing with kids is that they'll ask you what it is that they want to know. And the thing with us as adults is that we just need to answer their questions and not embellish and not get stuck. It's like, the kid says, where do babies come from? You don't have to go into the whole, intercourse and mommy and daddy love each other and blah, blah. You don't have to do this. Where do babies come from? They come from, mom's uterus. And if then they say, well, how did it get into the uterus? Well, then you can talk more about it. But maybe sometimes that's all they wanted to know. And then when they want to know another piece of information, they'll come back because they'll know mom will always tell me the truth. So I have two daughters. They're now this year turning 24 and 25. Whatever they asked me, they got the truth. And my patients, we have the same deal. If you're going to ask me, I'm going to say, do you want me to tell you the truth? And they'll say, yeah, I do. So I'm asking you. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. And my kids, knew the names of all the parts of, their body and whatever they wanted to know. So that's sort of the first rule. Just be honest and answer the question. Don't embellish. The second thing is, little kids will want to know why people died. The latest data that I've seen is that by the age of 6, 50% of children will have lost a parent, a grandparent, or a sibling to death. That's half of the children. And so what are we going to do? Not talk about death, not normalize it? What my goal is to make death and dying a normal thing. babies are born. Hopefully they live a certain, a good long amount of life, but they'll live whatever length it's supposed to be. And then they die. And that's the circle of life. And that happens to everyone. Everyone dies, which is why we call the book
I love
Everyone
it.
Dies.
Yeah, no,
So
great.
it's simple. And the book comes from a trip we took 2 Christmases ago. Our kids were there, our grandson was there, and Jax was 3, almost 4 at the time, or maybe he had just turned 4. I think he just turned 4. And we're walking along the beach and we find this crab leg. And I'm a nurse, what can I tell you? I pick up the crab leg. I said, look how it articulates, see how this moves. This is how it eats. This is what it does. And he said, where's the rest of the body? And I said, well, I think that when you lose a whole arm like this, that the crab probably died. Oh, well, so the crab is dead? And I said, well, yeah, because he was really, really hurt. And when you're really, really hurt, that's one of the reasons that you die. He's like, oh, okay. So he kept that leg. He loved that leg. And we're walking along the beach, and we, as we head back, we run into his dad. And his dad is this, 6 foot whatever Marine. And he says, look, Dad, I found this crab leg. And the dad says, oh, and did the rest of the crab go off to see his mom? And Jax looks at his dad and says, no, Dad, he's dead. And the dad says, Marcus says, oh, looks over at me. I'm like, if the kid asks me a question, I'm not going to not answer.
That's what happens when your grandma is a gerontologist, and a palliative care nurse. But I love that. And it's interesting that, so about 13 years ago, I moved in and I lived in a bunch of retirement communities. It was a little project that I did. And at the time I was 43, and I was, death and dying is something that me and my peers would tiptoe around the conversation. So and I don't know, instead of sort of saying to your kid, yeah, the crab died, it's sort of, did the crab go off to see his mommy, or his mom and dad, or what, that I feel like we in conversations about death and dying, we would tiptoe around it. When I lived in this community where many of the residents would pass away, and again, we can die at any age, at any time, but percentage wise, if you put a bunch of 85-year-olds together, death and dying is more normalized, and I found that the conversations with my fellow residents were much more open and candid and emotional. It was really refreshing, and I think that if young people are introduced to this conversation early on, it can make a big difference. Another interesting thing, I taught undergrad aging studies as well at UMBC, and I love talking about aging topics, especially advanced directives, to 18-year-olds. They find it fascinating, and they go home for Thanksgiving break, and it becomes a conversation at the table, and it opens the door for the adults who are nervous and scared about talking about these topics because they think, oh, I can't talk about death because it might come true. Well, yeah, it's gonna come true,
Right. It's just a matter of when and what the circumstances are.
When did you write the book? How long ago did you write the book?
Well, I came home from that trip. So January of 2020, I came home from that trip and I thought, this is a great story to go with how I've always talked about death. I mean, even with my kids, there's 3 reasons that people die. They die because they're very, very old, very, very sick, or very, very hurt. You always put the very, very end, because we get hurt, we get sick, and we get old. And so that was this shared language in our family. And like I said, my kids are 24 and 25. And if I say, oh, so-and-so's, really sick, they'll say, well, are they really, really sick? Because that's our language, that this person is dying. And there's only 3 reasons that people die. And I recently on my show did an interview with a 5-year-old, because his mom actually is a gerontologist, went to UMass, and William V, who lives in Massachusetts, wanted to know why people died. And so he came on the show and he says, I want to know. And so I talked about it with him, and he said, yeah, but you left something out. I said, well, what did I leave out, William V? He said, you left out if they get killed with bayonets, because they go to all of these Civil War reenactments because they live in Massachusetts. And I said, yeah, but William, if you get stuck with a bayonet, then you're really, really hurt. And that's why you died. He's like, oh, and that just simplifies it.
Mhm.
And then you could see, like if you're walking and you see a dead bird, you can look at it and you say, oh, I wonder what happened. Do you think he was really, really sick? Or do you think that he was really, really hurt? Or maybe he was really, really old. You can have this whole conversation about this dead bird. And it's easier to talk about the bird. And then, someday your pet is going to die. And then someday grandma and grandpa are going to die, or maybe you're going to die, but you give them a language that they can talk about it, that they can understand it. And we don't go in the book, we don't go into, and then you go to heaven or whatever. That's for you as the parent or the grandparent. What are your values and what are your beliefs? I mean, those are values and beliefs. We're giving you facts. And so we'll give you the facts, and then you can do what you want with it. But if, like without using this model, if you say, oh, grandpa went to sleep and he went to heaven and he's in a better place. If you've got a little kid, you're like, wait a minute, grandpa liked to be with me. Well, how could wherever I'm not be a better place for grandpa? That makes no sense. And then it just raises more questions, and it's disconcerting. And then it makes the whole thing like, well, is that true? Are my parents telling me the truth? Just tell the truth. And start from the time they are very young. This is a picture book, Steve. This is for, here's this Jax on that trip. With his crab, he's holding his crab. And I even have pictures when we put him down for his nap that day. He had his crab with him. That crab, he liked that crab. But it's a picture book, it's got grandpa, he's got his pops there. And Jax, and good images of his grandfather. He's not some, I hate when people do, grandfathers with the cane and all bumped over. This guy's buff and, doing stuff because that's what his grandfather looks like, And so just be honest, answer their questions. And and I've had so many adults who say, I need to read that book because I don't really know how to talk about it either.
Oh yeah, no, this is, we have the opportunity to really impact the future generation with appropriate discussions on growing older and what have you. So this is great. Okay. Even though Amanda's not here, I want to give a shout out to her for the book that she just wrote, and I'd like to let's broaden the discussion of talking about aging topics with children, because the theme of Amanda's book, which is What's Wrong with Grandma, is how do you talk about dementia and various cognitive issues with children. And we've got her book right there. I'm gonna drop this into the link into chat, and then this is going to be a little bit self-serving, but I want to use, oh, and let's see, let's see, Katie says, this is so insightful. Does Dr. Marianne have any recommendations on age-appropriate books for teenagers on the topic? Yeah, have you stumbled into any other books? But I guess, the cool, yeah, again, teenagers, everything's got to be cool, and any words of wisdom on discussing these topics with a teen?
Well, actually, where my writing partner is working on a book for like the next level age group, because we realize this is a children's book and you're not going to read it to a teenager. But I think that the conversation is the same, is that here's what happens. And, with teenagers, I can remember when my kids were teens, a boy that they knew committed suicide. And the story was that parents said, you're falling behind on your schoolwork, you're staying home to finish your schoolwork, and he was not going to be allowed to go to some, I think he played basketball or baseball. He wasn't allowed to go to some party thing that was related to this. And the mom said, here's a list of chores. I'm going to the grocery store. You do these chores, and then you start on your homework. And she leaves, and she comes back to opening up the garage door, and he had used the gun that his father had given him for Christmas, and a note, that the list of chores, like, put through the broom. And we talked about that extensively in terms of kids don't really realize that this, yes, you're mad, but this is forever. This is forever. And I would take, I don't know if it was right or wrong, but I would take the girls to funerals. I had a friend whose son committed suicide, and we went to the wake. And I wanted to go to support my friend, but I also wanted the girls to see the pain that parents and families experience at such an untimely death. I didn't want to shield them from that. Our actions have consequences. All of our actions have consequences, and they can be good consequences. They can be not so good consequences, and they can be extremely horrible consequences. And if we as parents don't take that role and do that hard work of having difficult conversations and having, to support and talk about these things, then there's not going to be an understanding as these children grow up. What do you think about that? You work in gerontology. What's your thought?
Oh, number one, I think you're a wonderful parent, and it's interesting. So does Amy. I love your approach. It makes perfect sense, but none of us have an owner's manual for this parenting. So if your mom and dad, skirted difficult conversations or things of that nature, unless you consciously think about it, we're going to follow the generations in front of us. So I love what you've done. And I love the fact that, like, if somebody gets this book, they can break that generational sort of pattern. But Amy O'Donnell says, how funny how personal life experience dictates the direction of that conversation, and how the answers you get from different people help shape your views. This is sort of what I'm kind of saying there. I know I was one of those kids who always asked why, and was overly observant at family members' funerals, my poor parents, they would have loved to have had your book. And I agree, you know, I agree with Amy there is that it's, if you've been raised a certain way, probably one of the most difficult things is to break that family tradition or that family technique of dealing with difficult issues. And then what ends up happening is we have another generation that is being raised in that direction, which is not, none of us can label it, but I think as I hear you talk, it's so insightful. It's like, just tell the truth. It's going to be great.
That's what it really comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other side of that though, Steve, is only answer the question you're asked.
Very good.
I can remember leaving out this book about like becoming a girl, becoming a woman, you know, one of those puberty kind of things.
Oh, well, I got a daughter. We've got that book too.
the one, what's the doll collection? Is it that one?
Well, there's Barbie and American Girl doll and
American Girl. So American Girl has this really great book about like, you know, puberty. And so I would just leave things laying around, you know, and let them pick it up. And I remember my daughter and a friend of hers were reading this book and she shouts out, "Hey, Mom, does it hurt?" Now I'm thinking, I don't know what chapter you're on. I said, you know, what chapter are you on? What are you talking about? And she said about, you know, menstruation. I said, oh, well, you know, it can, you know, depends. Everybody's different. But I thought, you know, I don't know. Are they on the intercourse chapter? I don't know what chapter. I don't know where they are.
To your point,
just ask more questions.
Yeah, to your point, only answer the question that is asked. Provide the information, only answer the question that is asked. Okay, let's, so I totally forgot about this video that I made 12 years ago. And I want to share it with the audience and see if anything pops on this topic of talking about aging with kids. So some of you all may remember about 12 years ago, I moved in and lived in 5 different senior living communities. And one time I made the move, I took my son who was 6 at the time, and I made this recording before and after he experienced living in a senior living community. One of the reasons I like this video is it illustrates what a clean slate children are. They don't have age bias. They don't, you know, when we're talking to them about death, they don't know anything about it, you know? And out of curiosity, how old was Jax in that, with the crab?
He had just turned 4.
And how old is he now?
He's turning, so maybe he was 3.
Okay.
Because it was, yeah, so and he's turning 5. He is turning 5.
Okay, so that was recent. Yeah. Okay, so my son, who's this video that I'm gonna share with you here, my son was 6 and now he's 18. But wow. But have a listen to this. There's a couple of things that I'm hoping could be discussion points on talking to kids. Hey, what do you think of going to live in a retirement community with Daddy?
Good.
Do you know what a retirement community is?
Yes.
What is it?
It's where people can't find it's where people can't it's where people can't or lost and they find a retirement community and stay there.
Okay, so do you want to tell Ashley about the retirement community, what she can expect?
Okay, Ashley, there's 2. Here's what a retirement community is. It's where people stay to meet other people. And now we are showing people what it's like, how old you can be, what it's like to bring younger people instead of older people. And younger people and older people here.
Do you know what the word geriatric means?
No,
How about elderly?
no.
How about aging? Do you know what aging is?
Yes,
What's that?
it's how old you are.
And what do you think about people that are older than you?
But they are really nice. And they're really different.
Why are they different?
Really different. Because everyone is different. Because everyone's different, but inside everyone's the same.
Do you know what a retirement community is?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I hope you don't think I'm, that's like, showing your kids, exploiting your kids. But but there's a couple of things there that I wanted to bring up for discussion. First off, my kid didn't know what geriatric and elderly meant. And when we asked him what aging is, he gave the proper definition of aging. It's how old you are. Aging does not mean that you're geriatric. We're all aging. So I love that. And that was not scripted. And what I really like is that he had no clue before he moved to this retirement community what it was. He didn't have age bias. He didn't have any of that. The interesting thing is when we would get into the elevator, everybody would say, "How are you holding up with us old folks?" The older adults are the ones that sort of gave him this age bias, but it was I wanted to share that because it might be thought-provoking, and it was an interesting experience. That's for sure. But what I like his definition of a retirement community after he lived there, it's a place you go where you meet people. Okay. Mm-hmm. And before he went, he said, people are lost and they moved to a retirement community. I love the blank slate that
Yeah.
kids are.
Great video.
So thank you, Elizabeth and Ada. They gave me a couple of compliments on my kids in the video there, but
oh, they're adorable.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. Thanks. I very, very lucky. So, okay. So I wanted to at least sort of use that as broadening the topic of, talking about aging topics with children. We've talked, you've given us a lot of insight on death, but thinking about various things that we say that sort of feeds like an ageist viewpoint to children. Not Dr. Matzo, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's the things that we say ourselves, the things that, oh my God, I'm getting so old. Oh, I don't want to tell you how old I am on this birthday, and we just perpetuate that nonsense ourselves. And so, when people say to me, oh my God, I'm so upset I'm turning 40 at this birthday, my answer always is it beats the alternative. Yeah. Because either you grow old or you've died. Well, those are your two choices.
Yeah. And think about it. It's like, what I love is that we have $1 billion anti-aging industry. Just the term anti-aging, it's very Dr. Kevorkian like. If you think about it, it's sort of but we're smearing anti-aging stuff all over our face, you know. As you were talking, I was reminded of a panel that I was on, and I'm trying to remember, I wish I remember the name of this doctor. She was a gerontologist, and there was something that somebody in the audience said, and she goes, "Oh, wow." She goes, "You know, my daughter has been watching me color my hair for years." And she's like, "I never thought about what that message could be sending to my doctor. I mean, to my daughter." You know, and like we have these casual conversations around the family dinner table, you know, about our aches and pains, our wrinkles, our gray hair or no hair or what have you. And those conversations have impact on our children and how they're going to view this very important chapter in our lives. And when you think about the cultures that really revere the elders, my gut level feeling is they're not having any conversations like that in the village, that the conversations are all about how, you know, this person, this elder is revered.
Well, I think that there's a difference though between aging and vanity, because you've got 30-year-olds getting Botox because there's this view that they want to have, you know, and the view changes, you know, like when I was younger, you didn't want to have a big butt, and now big butts are like really good, you know. And so, you know, it's all about the booty. Well, it's like, really? Okay. You know, I think it has more to do with how do we act in our old age. My husband's 67 and he runs every day. And that's the model of aging that we give the kids. We dive, we do, you know, we're active, we do things. We're not, you know, sitting in our lazy boy chairs screaming at the TV, you know. So you can act old at 25, or you can not act old. And so again, there's that role modeling. I was 39 when I had my first child, and do the math, 40 when I had my second child. And so they grew up with elder parents. You know, we were not the norm. And, you know, we would, you know, get up off the floor or something. We go, oh, you know, as we stand up. And one day, you know, the 3-year-old stood up and went, oh, and I said, oh God, this is what we're teaching her. You know, you get up off the floor and you moan. You know?
Yeah.
So
no,
we have to be aware.
Yep. Now, here's one of the things, and you kind of stumbled on a topic that we've talked a lot about on these discussions, is that, you know, so for example, that being older and being able to engage in athletic and active pursuits is a great way to be healthy and what have you. But I think one of the things that we talk a lot about here is that, like, hey, let's say that, you know, my main activity is running or cycling, and then something happens and I can't do that anymore. And I've got so much purpose tied up in this active lifestyle basket that, you know, but there's so much out there in the world that we can participate in that doesn't require physical, so if something happens and you're suddenly in a wheelchair, you can still live an active, purposeful lifestyle and be a good role model and what have you. But I just put that as an asterisk, because sometimes when folks use the example of athletic pursuits as an idea of positive aging or successful aging, is that I always like to sort of throw out that we've got to reinvent ourselves if someday we can't do those activities, and there's lots of other things in the world to do, you know.
But the other side of that, Steve, is that if you keep yourself healthy, if you are active, if your brain is active, if you're open to new possibilities, if if you've exercised, if it's walking or gardening or whatever it is that you're doing, if you have a stroke, if you have one of these events, you have some resilience and some ability to rehab better than if you didn't do those things. So it's an investment in what happens, in terms of how much you can get back, but it's also that mental aspect of it. Like you're saying, it's like, it's healthy aging is your body, but it's also your mind.
No, absolutely. And it's resilience and having a wide enough field of vision that you can reinvent yourself if something changes. I mean, it's that, I can't tell you how many people I talk to whose pursuit is running, but then the knees blow out. They're super healthy. I mean, they've been doing all the right things, but the knees are gone, and so what am I going to do now? Well, I like exercise, I'm swimming. Or if somebody has a stroke and they end up in a wheelchair, now, hey, I'm going to make models. I used to like, vintage cars. I can sit at a table and do that. I think it's one of the stereotypes is the skydiving 85-year-old is that while we all admire that, we don't want anybody to think that if you're not jumping out of planes at 85, you're not living the successful aging lifestyle,
Right, exactly.
Holy cow. I just glanced at the clock. I can't believe it. We burned through another hour.
Did we really?
Yeah. This is crazy. Dr. Matzo, you are awesome. I am so glad that our paths have crossed. I'm really excited to have you back on again with Amanda, and we'll do this proper or on any topic whatsoever.
Or we could do it improper.
Improper, exactly. That's what we're talking about today is, and I'm really glad you introduced me to your podcast. I'm going to look at some of the topics that you've got on there, and it might be a catalyst for us to kind of collaborate or
I'd love that.
have you. And I'll make sure to share all this information with our audience. But
and remember that the podcast is for the lay public. It's not for professional education. I'm talking and educating, you. And so I keep it very clear and, and honest, I guess. And give you the information you need.
Well, one thing that we've stumbled on with our discussions, of which we have a professional audience and a consumer audience, I would say, is that because these topics are so difficult, the professionals are they're the ones that are referring, they're our ticket to get to the consumers. So for example, like I see on June 4th, you did communication with a loved one after their death. It's sort of like if I'm a financial planner and I'm talking to this recently widowed person who is sharing with me that she's struggling, it's sort of like, hey, you got to check out this podcast. This is kind of cool. Right. I think that it's a great thing for.
I'm hoping that professionals will use it that way, because we can do, as much time or as little time as we actually have when we're with them, and then we can say, hey, go to this website, go to this thing, and just hit play. And it'll give you a lot more information.
Yeah.
As professionals, we don't have to do it all alone. There's resources. So, utilize them, share them.
Yep. No, great. Okay. Dr. Matzo and our audience, enjoy the 2-week break. You're going to get less emails from me, and I will talk to you all soon.
Thanks for having me on, Steve.
You bet.